The first room just beyond the entrance was a locker room. There were 7 different lockers, each with our name on it. The room, however, did not actually smell like a locker room. It did have the smell of rust and iron, however, it did not reek of sweat, fungus, hormones, and anger. Then again, I only had a secondary school locker room to compare it to, so maybe not all locker rooms smelled that way. Still, the feeling was there. It was a set, not the actual place. Most of the pumpkin house had that feeling. It felt like it was a place made to look a certain way. However, what it actually was, it was something very different. It was still entertaining, but it was also felt a bit distracting at times. Like watching a movie and understanding how all of the effects work. Sure, it can still be entertaining, but you still find yourself thinking about the effects rather than what is on the screen. The lockers were lockers, and the names on them were just written ahead of time for us. Sure, it might be difficult to write the names ahead of time, but that was why there was so much time spent on Autumn's test. It gave them time to set up the equipment. I opened the door with my name and I found an odd looking rubber suit. There were layers in the rubber, and metal at the wrists, calves, and neck were made of brass, so it was easy for me to grab. The front was made to be stepped into, and sure enough, even with my shoes on, I could step through, leaving plenty of space, though at first it did leave my hands, head, and feet exposed. Thankfully, the diagram on the inside of the locker guided us through how to tuck our hair into the rubber hood before putting on the respirator and then the safety helmet. And then finally, we put on our boots and then the gloves last. Even if this locker was false, this personal protective equipment was clearly legitimate. It even had an emergency air supply on our back with a portable AC and equipment on our belts. The diagram also told us to leave our backpacks inside the lockers with a promise they would be returned to us. So we left our bags inside. Weirdly enough, the suits were designed to fit us all perfectly. They even had one perfectly sized for Fallen Grace, and there was no way in hell they would have randomly guessed this. Did Adanse use some of her omniscience for this, or was this some other trick? The equipment was clearly real, and even though the magician's power is great, he was supposed to be an illusionist and a master at sleight of hand. I examined myself in the mirror. Goggles, respirator, gloves, and reflective rubber made me unrecognizable underneath the equipment. There was a large number 1 on my arm, and there were numbers on the others. Number 2 on Autumn that I was near certain that the house was using to just mess with her just a little bit. She always wanted to be first, and by assigning her second, they were making her close to the first, while also denying it to her. A little insult that would have been invisible to others, but clear to both Autumn and myself. Kel was number 3, and he was having trouble putting on his goggles, so Dylan, number 4, was trying to help him get the goggles on, while Marceline, number 5, watched, trying to offer advice, and Fallen Grace, number 6, was sitting on Marceline's shoulder, strapped in as she was trying not to fall over laughing, while Kel somehow got his goggles on the back of his head. Always something with that guy, but he was having fun. Although it was the 7th locker that was strange. The name on it was difficult to read, because it was written badly, but because it wasn't written with a true name. The name written on it felt fluid and false. It was made to be recognized by the one who it was made for, but it wasn't their true name. They didn't think of themselves this way. It wasn't what they were named, and it wasn't what they called themselves. But it was made for them to recognize it when they came here. Although it was strange to have a 7th locker, there were only 6 of us here, although the dining table was set for 7. The woman in the maze was expecting 7 people, and there were 7 seats in the train. My first thought was we had someone unseen among us, although nothing I could see through my second sight showed anyone following us. Not even nobody special was following us. Although there are plenty of things in the world that are hidden from sight without being unseen, having a second sight was not the same thing as seeing everything. Microscopic life was still unseen to me, along with things that moved below or above us in both a metaphysical and pataphysical space. Then, of course, there was time. Someone or something could just as easily be watching or even following us from the past or from the future. It is hard to think of the past as a living thing since it has already passed, but it still lives as the roots of our world, often having unseen effects on the present. And then the future is the branches that are yet to be. So even if a future isn't guaranteed to happen, does not mean that the future isn't watching us right now. Still, why the seventh suit when there's only six of us? There was always six of us. I felt a tap on my shoulder and I turned to see Autumn. In her suit, she was muffled as she tried to speak. So after a moment of trying to be heard clearly, she switched to Imperial Sign Language. "Why stare there?" she asked with an exaggerated shrug to show she was confused. Sign language usually depended on very expressive faces or movements to indicate tone and emotion. Inside these suits, all we had was body movement to show what we meant. I signed back, "Weird locker," I said with my own shrug to indicate I was also confused about why it was there. That done, we turned away from the locker, with the suit inside being numbered 7. As we made our way back to the other, Kel's suit now on properly, he showed us the button on the belt for the radios. Now these are through the earth or TTE radio signals. They use low frequency radio waves through the wires in the mine that allow us to communicate. Please note though, these messages are not at all private, so anything we say will be heard by anyone in the mine that has a radio. So anything that needs to stay private, try to use ISL. And please don't remove your equipment. We have to stay safe, Kel said, and we nodded as the door to the mine squeaked. "My turn to lead," I said through the radio, confident that everyone in the mine heard what I said. I had to give everyone a chance to hear it and to prepare their scares. The door was iron with a large locking wheel. I quietly thanked the fact I was wearing rubber gloves. I traded a silent glance back to Falling Grace. Living in the exoteric world pretty much guaranteed you were living in a world that was never built for you. Certain metals burned and even poisoned you when you touched it. The rules were built on different assumptions. Even customs on what is or isn't polite is all based on assumptions that don't apply to you. Asking for names and providing names casually at every first meeting was borderline suicidal for someone like myself. So it's painful for it to be expected in everywhere I go. So my glance back to Falling Grace was meant to convey the fact that we were both outsiders here. So at least we were both outsiders together. I couldn't tell if Falling Grace was looking my way, but I was certain that she was thinking the same thing I was. I spun the door lock until finally the seal broke, and there was a rush of air as I pulled the door open. As I opened it, Autumn held the door open. I stepped through, and my first thought about the mine was the ceiling was shorter than I was expecting. It was barely a few centimeters above my helmet. The stone above had lines of wires stapled to the rock. There was a single light every 5 meters, giving enough light to guide the way forward, but leaving darkness so that something could hide inside of it. Flipping on the light on our helmets, I led forward, Autumn holding my hand and everyone else holding hands through the darkness. Going first through a haunt has a lot of downsides. Anything that can scare you will get to you first before anyone else. Although a good haunt like this one will also have unique scares for those in the middle and the back of the group. The legend told us about a lot of the crypt, but very little about any possible scares beforehand. As I led us forward, we made it to a large chamber that was clearly their refuge station. You could tell because there was a large aluminum sign announcing it as such. The chamber was large, with various steel beams holding the walls up, and steel fencing to keep any stray rocks away from the chamber. A good mine will have multiple refuge stations to act as a place for miners to hide until help arrives, a way of making a dangerous job safer, but most assuredly not safe. I spent so much time looking above that I forgot to look below, before I felt the group behind me pull back for a moment, so I looked down to see what everyone else saw. There were miner suits left behind. The shiny rubber was smeared with something brown that I was glad I couldn't smell through the respirator. There were no bodies left over, but that didn't make things any better. They left their suits behind, and because they weren't torn at all, it meant that they removed their suits before they were killed or taken. In one of the gloves, I saw a leather-bound journal. I opened it and I quickly read it over. Every single page was full of names, hundreds of names, just their name, age, and their role in the mine. Maybe an attendance journal? At least until the final pages of the journal, where there was an answer about what happened here. October 1st, 2758. There was an explosion in the lower level of the mine. Per the emergency response plan, we made our way to the refuge station. We are waiting for rescue, but no rescue has arrived. The doorway leading out of the mine is sealed from the other side. We keep trying to call Mr. Pyre, but he only has one message for us. Keep working. October 3rd, 2758. The water in the sinks and showers have turned black from some kind of pollutant from deeper in the mine. The change was sudden. Those who showered in the dirty water developed boils under their skin, and they cannot wear clothes. We can see movement underneath the boils. Something is swimming underneath their skin. We tried popping some of the boils, but it only spreads the black pus around. Anyone who touches it also starts to develop the rash, and the boils form soon after. Mr. Pyre's voice still comes through the radio when we try to call, and there is only ever one response. Keep working. October 4th, 2758. Those who are infected have made their way deeper into the mines. They leave their suits behind and they keep muttering about how they need to work. I don't know what they're doing deeper in the mine, but the water is getting worse. Even when it's aerosolized, it gets in our lungs. It causes changes on the inside. I watched as someone had their lungs fill with the water, coughing up the viscous mixture of water, blood, and pollution. A few of us are wearing the suits, but it's inside of us all now. I know it's inside of me. A boil has formed on my shoulder, and when I look at it in the mirror, the boil opens its eye and it blinks at me. Whatever this mutation is, it's getting worse, and I can hear the call beneath the mine. Whatever it is, it's connecting to me, and it wants me to release it all the way. I tried putting on my suit, but still the water must have gotten inside. I cannot remove the suit, not anymore. The clasps have corroded and rusted. When I try to force it open, I bleed through my suit. I can feel through the rubber. My nerves have grown into it. When I tried cutting off the suits, my skin beneath was rotten and bloody. My pickaxe is merged with the glove. I cannot let it go. I know that the voice beneath wants me to use it to release it. October 5th, 2758. I am the last one here. I can no longer resist the voice. I think the world above is worse than below, and I have to let it out. It promises to fix everything if we just let it out. So, I will let it out. The journal ends there, and I carefully leave it where it was. Mr. Pyre ordered the miners to keep working after the event, and it took mere days for everyone to change into the enemy. And this is where it all started, and they had the most time to change. The Overseer and the Dreadnought were already terrifying, and they didn't have 2 weeks of practically living with the mutagen. I pointed the way deeper into the mine, and I led with 6 following behind. The lights here continued to not be very strong, but I could see evidence of the dirty water dripping from the ceiling and the walls. Condensation was not unheard of in mines, although most condensation was not the same color as blood. We passed from the light into darkness as our steps started to crunch and squish at the same time. It was better not to look at it. I stepped through the darkness and into the light, where I saw more water, both black and red, drip down from above. The wires above buzzed and pulsed at the same time, leaking the fluid that should have shorted out the electric wires. I noticed the walls were twitching with movement beneath the stone. Something moved underneath the stone. Maybe it was digging. However, my senses told me something else. It told me that the mine was breathing, and that what I was feeling beneath the stone was the pulses of the mine's blood vessels. I turned a corner, and the lights ahead were soaked in blood. Casting red light below, I could see something coating the walls. Stepping forward, I could see there was more graffiti on the walls, more names inscribed on the walls, names, ages, and their job titles in spray paint, all of which gradually being washed away by the dirty water, leaving it barely readable. The event wipes away their names, their individuality, their humanity, turning them from people into another casualty of the event. A crisis so severe it shaped our entire world. A crisis so powerful that people changed their lives around it, forever changing the world into before the event and after the event. And yet, here we were, so many victims that we can never learn them all. Their memory forever reduced to a name on a memorial, wiped away by the very thing that caused them to be memorialized. The tunnel led to another chamber. Construction lights at the edge of the room lit up the entire chamber. The floor was made from rock and stone, but the real story was above us. Dangling above us were numerous coffins, suspended above by tree roots, holding the dangling coffins above us. I could see a few coffins had holes in them. Inside of them, I could see bones. We're beneath the crooked cemetery, I said over the radio, and the 7 others nodded solemnly. This wasn't made after the event. The enemy would not have had an interest in setting up construction sites beneath dead bodies. They could only affect the living, and there was no trace of the enemy here. Mr. Pyre must have found more to mine here. He did not care about disturbing the dead where they lay. He only wanted to gain more. So here we were, the bones of the dead, suspended but only by the bones of the trees long dead above. The apparent exit was a gate carved from stone. It resembled the columns from Argiv, and above the gate, written in silver, was an inscription in Old Latin. Most of the inscription was carved out by the miners, probably trying to get the silver for their boss. but they did not have time to remove all of it before they headed further into the mine. Spem deponite, abandon hope, I said through the radio, and behind me 5 others in their miner suits followed along. The others remained behind. I know that they have been following us. They were quiet, they were cautious, but I know how many people were in my group. I didn't say anything because addressing them would have made paranoia and distrust much worse. But as long as they didn't mess with us, I didn't say anything. I walked through the Hell Gate first, followed closely by my sister and the others. Here, things changed quickly from the mine. The electric lights got much further apart, most of them flickering and weak in the darkness. The ceiling was also much higher, so we could all walk without hunching over. And unlike the mine, these tunnels weren't just carved with mining equipment. These were made out of limestone, and as far as I can tell, there was not a single seam nor tool mark. I touched the wall with my glove, and even through the glove, I could feel the shape of shell and bone underneath. As tempting as it was to say that they carved the tunnel out of limestone, that was not how it felt. It felt more like the stone was formed into this shape. Across millions of years from the bottom of the ocean, these tunnels formed, and from those millions of years, they were formed around something in the middle, something I am certain was the center of this event. We continued down the limestone tunnel, and as we did, we passed by alcoves that each held statues of strange things. The first we passed was of something that was insect-like, shaped perfectly out of the limestone. I could see the 3-meter tall statue. It had 6 legs, and the body was shaped like a spider's abdomen, with a symbol like an omega on the body. The thorax was like a centipede, curving as it went up and up. The arms were like that of a mantis, sharp even as a sculpture, and open and eager to consume its prey. The head was the most disturbing part. It was carved to resemble a human woman, her eyes closed and her hair very long, practically down to the ground. The next statue was similar to an angel, similar in the way that the face was smooth and featureless. The wings were plentiful and blocked out the body, leaving it unclear if the statue had a body at all, or if it only was wings. The statue did not touch the ground, and we moved on carefully to get away from the statue, careful not to attract the attention. These statues unsettled me far more than the twisted dolls of the maze. Those were made to represent victims of a tragedy. These beings were the cause of them. The final alcove we passed by was the simplest. It stood at only 2 meters tall, the same height as a human. It was shaped like a person, but no features were visible. It was covered in a sheet made of limestone, not looking dissimilar to a ghost or a funeral shroud. I could see hands peeking out underneath the sheet, and the feet were also peeking out, wearing sandals. It must have been a statue of a ghost, since it was covered in the funeral shroud. That was actually where the trope of ghosts wearing sheets came from. The old stories told about ghosts appearing in their funeral shroud or funeral clothes. The stories became popular enough they spread throughout the world, and then ghosts in sheets became popular enough and safe enough to make the ghosts appropriate for children at Feralia. It is interesting to think about because people love to complain about how the monsters of their generation are made into the friends or misunderstood creatures of the next generation. A classic undead serial killer goes from a haunting and hunting in a lake to the next generation's campy camp counselor teaching children about bullying and the importance of swimming. An existential threat of radiation and disharmony returned from the dead haunts the lost generation of the 2720s, becomes a video game antagonist in the 2770s for children aged 8 or older, where plants fight the living dead. Just an existential threat representing a giant cultural anxiety that was felt by most of the planet, now something that is easy to understand and conquer. A lot of people feel angry about this, seeing an old fright reduced to a joke, not realizing this has always been the natural progression of fears. Making a joke out of something that used to scare you or even scare others. Sometimes what it represents is no longer a threat, and sometimes what it represents is still a threat, but you wish to face it, so you make it a joke. Even knowing all of this information, facing the statue of the ghost in the funeral shroud struck terror into my heart. Millennia of fear of death, ghosts, and spirits returning after death filled my heart as ice filled my veins, and I walked by the statue. As I did so, I took a deep breath before I turned to face the group. I could see everyone looking towards me as I held two hands out. My left hand open, fingers splayed out with my palm facing myself, while my right hand was in a fist with only the thumb sticking up like a knife. My right hand and thumb bounced a few times, miming stabbing myself with my thumb, and the others saw it and they nodded as I turned back to face forward. All I had was a feeling, but I trusted that feeling and I shared it with the others, and they were all in agreement. We were in danger, and the danger was shown by that statue. I am pretty certain we were going to have to deal with the ghosts of the mind soon enough. We traveled forward to another large chamber. More construction lights were here, and I looked up and up as I saw numerous statues in the chamber. All of them are statues of the figures in shrouds, and I could not see the ceiling of this chamber, just a never-ending spiral of ghosts that went up, seemingly forever. The way forward seemingly being a spiral staircase in the center of it all, leading down. More limestone steps shaped by unimaginable forces that shaped all of this place from one solid rock. Unimaginably powerful forces that sculpted these statues and this chamber that the miners discovered, and still they went deeper into the place that warned them to abandon hope as they came closer to the end. Adansi, what have you done? Why are you like this? I asked no one in particular, not even bothering to put it on the radio. She always did something scary for the pumpkin house, but why did she carve something like this? This far bypassed the classic story about haunted mines, and now it was something else entirely, a level of horror I didn't realize she was capable of, a dread that only deepened as we continued. I made my way to the stairwell, where I found the first imperfection of the entire limestone temple. Carved into the first step was a single sentence written in common Creole. The writing wasn't chiseled, it looked like it was written by running a finger through the stone before it was set, like signing wet cement with a finger before it had a chance to cure. Except limestone didn't work that way. And even if it did, then this would have had to set millions of years before humanity ever evolved. That alone was terrifying enough, but what was written was somehow more haunting. I miss my family, the message said. The only imperfection, made millions of years ago before the language it was written in would ever be discovered, and that was the message? I shuddered as I made my way down the dark steps. Unlike everything else in the limestone temple, It was not lit. We must be getting close to where the center of it all was. I ran my hand on the left wall as we passed more and more alcoves. These alcove statues weren't ghosts nor the monsters we saw before. They were people. Each one of them is carved from limestone, every face unique, clothing worn from every era, every age, every gender, every race. The only similarity between them all was the fact that inside their carved sockets, instead of eyes of limestone, was eyes made from gold. The shiny gold followed us and glittered even without the light. We passed them as I felt the eyes follow me, as I began to notice imperfection and damage in some of the statues. One of them, a woman in a long dress, had her head missing, revealing that the statue was solid throughout her head, nowhere to be seen. Another was a figure with the arm broken, and the statue looked like it was nursing its broken arm, the broken bones visible inside the broken off part, along with the muscle and tissue, all made from limestone. So strange that there was so many ghosts above and so many people down below, almost like the idea of life and death were reversed, death above and life below. Although I had no proof that any of these figures were based on real people, or even if they were supposed to be alive, they could just have easily been memorials for the dead, formed millions of years ago before humanity evolved. Yeah, there was something strange happening here. As I made it further, I found flecks of paint in the statues. Soon, those flecks had more and more paint on it. Eventually, the statues were completely painted in a way that looked disturbingly human. I passed by a man in his 50s who had smile lines on his face, his golden eyes watching me as I stepped by, trying not to disturb the statue, fearing he may be an actor. I passed by a young child. Her skin burned so severely I had no idea how she was supposed to be alive. Her golden eyes cast down sadly, not even making eye contact with us, but still following us as we made our way further down. Every statue was a wonder that I wished we could take a picture of, but we had to continue. Whatever these golden eye statues represented, I could feel it deep in my bones that there was power in this place. These statues weren't just made to look pretty, they were the focus and locus of something powerful, something that even now was watching us, and all I could do was hope it would not try to scare us. The landing on the bottom was in front of a painted statue, the most detailed statue yet. It depicted a young girl with dark skin, wearing a very large hat with ribbons, in all colors, including purple. Her dress was painted and smeared in red paint, showing handprints and fingerprints across her dress of yellow and white. The front of her chest was open, and we could see her ribs and her internal organs covered in a layer of slimy-looking blood. Her heart and lungs were still, but it looked like it could start beating at any minute. Her brown eyes underneath her hat lacked any shine, but still the eyes felt like they were following me. Wait, brown eyes? All of the statues down here had golden eyes. This statue wasn't a statue. As the others got down where Marceline saw the young girl at the statue, she fell to her knees, and even through the respirator, I could hear her crying. She was sobbing at the feet of the statue. I could see Falling Grace trying to comfort her, while we turned to each other as we were all confused why this one statue broke her down so much. We had seen worse things in the countryside and the rail yard, So why was one statue with one girl with one exposed heart too much for Marceline? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. What could have done this to you? I heard Marceline say through the radio to the silence of the statue and the group. I then noticed in front of the statue were 7 candles and a single long lighter that we could use in our gloves. Marceline glanced back up at the statue and the candle as she grabbed the lighter and lit the first candle before lighting all the others. The candles now lit, she began to sign to the statue, something she did not want to share with the entire mine, but despite this, I understood what she was saying. I think she wanted us to know. Hello, little sister. You were my hero. Perfect, strong, enduring, and compassionate. I have failed you. I have her with me, but I think I will lose her. I was never the hero. Marceline signed to the statue, which mystified me until I heard static on the radio. At first, the words were too soft to hear, but then gradually it cleared as I heard the voice of a little girl, a voice I never heard before, and yet when I heard her voice, it sounded like how I thought of my inner voice. A voice I never heard made real, and here it was on the radio. You don't build an ark after it starts raining. You don't bake bread before it finishes proofing. You have failed no one, least of all me, the voice said before the static cleared. I blinked behind my goggles and I realized I was tearing up from those words. I blinked away the tears and slowly Marceline stood and we turned around, making our way out of the stairs onto the dais of the temple. In the very center of the dais was the sarcophagus, symbols and words carved all along the sides of it, clear for everyone to see. While I did not understand all of the warnings, in the languages I did understand were all of the same warning. Do not open. The chains over the top of the sarcophagus held it down to the pillars at the edge of the dais. At each end, I saw the miners work on the chains, or what was left of the miners. Those with PPE were left barely more than skeletons of bone and iron. Their rusty bones creaked with every movement, banging away at the chains, trying to break the chains. Those who were still wearing their PPE were given a chance to mutate into something else. I saw something that used to be a person crawl forward on arms and legs, made of rubber and flesh, 8 spindly limbs with no hands nor feet, that had a large mouth in the respirator, but no eyes behind the goggles, as it gagged and spat something yellow and viscous on the chains, presumably a type of acid. I also oddly saw a miner with most of their equipment on, but I could see their skull through their goggles. They saw me, so they flashed me a thumbs up as they went back to the anchor, trying to release the source. They must have thought of us as more of the same because we all wore the same uniforms. On the sarcophagus, I could also see the source of the darkness that polluted the water. On the steps leading up to the sarcophagus was a single thin stream of jet black oil that seeped out of the sarcophagus. Without the oil, I never would have seen the crack at all. The oil fell to the water in a super thin line. So much death, so much destruction, caused by such a small leak. It led into the water, and I could see that it turned all of the water surrounding the dais into something dark and polluted. Maybe this water was fresh and pure, but the leakage must have made it into the groundwater, and then it was pumped up into the aquifer that supplied Vandenberg with water. I will seal the leak, I signed to everyone else, only to have Autumn sign back. How? I removed one of the tools from the belt that was supplied to us, a single roll of duct tape. Did I believe that it could permanently stop the leak in the sarcophagus? Not really, but the story given to us by Adansi seemed to imply that stopping the leak would allow the sarcophagus to either regenerate or repair itself, blocking the source from leaking out, leading to the eventual end of the event and the eventual extinction of the enemy. Although I know that there had to be a risk, so I walked up those steps alone. Even as I made my way up those steps, the enemy did not notice me. To them, I was just another miner, another worker, another person trying to free the source. I wore the same clothes, I walked the same way, so clearly I was the same as them. Now, in front of the crack, I could see the top of the sarcophagus, and the legend did not give it justice. I saw inscriptions of gold and silver showing a powerful and dark shape spreading across the Earth, and spreading across the solar system, and spreading across our galaxy, consuming it all. I saw on the sarcophagus lights going out, a near infinite universe consumed under an infinite darkness. Power so great that it seemed impossible to contain, and something as insignificant as a sarcophagus. And yet, here it was. Where the head of the sarcophagus should be was a large dark hole, just big enough for me to crawl into, if I wanted to. Around that hole were depictions of orbits and planets, forever flying around the never-ending black hole that seemed to get closer and closer to me. I did notice something inscribed over the hole leading into the sarcophagus. Almost an afterthought, but it was something that I could read. Clips, I said to myself, and I felt myself start to return to the present. I became aware of the fact that it was crawling on top of the sarcophagus, less than a meter from the black hole in the sarcophagus's face. Eclipse must have been the name of the entity inside of the sarcophagus. That knowledge made things a little easier. I became aware of the fact that the sarcophagus was trying to pull me into itself. However, having its name reduced some of its power, and gave me some power over it. There is power in names, and being able to name that's what something is. A lot of people like to think of it as a magic word that can be said that gives complete control over something, and that is usually not how it works. On a much smaller scale, it is a way of acknowledging something and being able to see it. Throughout history, people struggled with diseases, illnesses, evils, and ordeals that they had no word for. They didn't understand why their parents were gone. They were gone. There was no word for death, no concept, no words for grief, no words to reassure what was happening because they didn't have the words to address such things. They just knew that they were gone, and they had no other concept to explain their pain, so they couldn't explain it with the others. They couldn't heal from a wound that they couldn't see, let alone name. People felt so alone in history because they didn't know what they were. They just knew that they were different from those around them. They didn't have words for things like autistic, queer, neurodivergent, traumatized, disabled, or even unique. They only knew that they were different from those around them, so they assumed it was something wrong with them since they had no words to identify themselves, other than being different or wrong. Massive events can occur in life and people can refuse to name it or what happened, preferring a polite silence over a rude addressing. All this time, all these struggles, we never bothered to even think if the source of the event had a name. The cause of these horrible mutations was an eldritch being named Eclipse, whose blood was contaminating the world. Now, with the entity's name, I found the crack, and I pulled out the duct tape and I taped over the crack. One layer, then two, then three. Enough of a layer that I was certain it was fully contained. I could see that the oil no longer leaked from the sarcophagus, and after just a few seconds, the last of it beaded away into the water. The water began to clear, just slightly, but I could see the healing was beginning. Eclipse's blood could no longer flow into the water. It would take time to get better, but now at least it was no longer getting worse. The other miners no longer worked on their tasks. They sat where they were, no longer attempting to free Eclipse. They could no longer hear the call of the eldritch beast, so they no longer had any purpose. Maybe in time the corruption will clear from their minds, freeing them to make their own choices. Or maybe it would never be free, and it would only be another casualty of the event, never getting the chance to be human again. I made my way to the others, where they stood by a very long boat. The ferryman on the boat was underneath a dark cloak. The cloak wasn't pure black, but it was a dark midnight blue, with true darkness underneath the hood. Pure darkness from which smoke gradually leaked out from underneath the hood, like the ferryman was smoking. Grabbed a long pole of the same unbreakable metal that the chains were made from. His arms were skeletal, the bones yellow and cracked with age. There was gold filling between his cracks that made him also an amalgam of both bone and metal. Still, there were 7 seats for us in the boat as we sat in 5 of them, with Fallen Grace still riding on her sister's shoulders. We sat in silence as the ferryman moved us further and further down the dark river, as in the dark tunnel, the only light from our headlamps. There was silence for a while before finally Dylan spoke up over the radio. Did we even do any good? The countryside burned down and we aren't sure that we saved anyone, he said before I responded over the radio. Dylan, it's easy to see everything we did wrong. However, that doesn't mean that inaction would have been a better choice. The event started regardless of our actions. People were hurt regardless of what we did. The only thing we did was stop the event. We have given the world a chance to get better. I know people love to point at people trying to help and say, they're no hero because people still got hurt. It's easy to say our actions caused more damage than good, and we should be careful of our actions. However, being careful is not the same as not taking action. We did not harm anyone. We took action and we stopped the event. Yes, we will need to mourn those that are lost. The countryside, the rail yard, those lost in the casino, and of course all those poor miners. If you think that you are doing the wrong thing, by all means examine your actions and see if there is a better action you can take. However, don't think that inaction is always the best answer. If we did nothing, do you think the event would have ended? No. Do you think that there would have been less casualties? Definitely not. Did we do anything that you considered wrong? He asked, and he thought about it for a moment before shaking his head and signing, no. So, why do you think we didn't do any good? I asked him, and he answered, I cannot help but feel like I should have done more, that if I managed to do more good, that we could have done better. I know it's a paradox, but I always have a feeling that I need to do better. A little voice always screaming in my head that it's not good enough, that there's always somewhere to improve, and it pushes me so far in so much. It feels like I've done nothing at all. I can spend 10 hours at work, and when the day ends, I feel like I should have done more because they're shorthanded. I can get 4.0 grades, and I feel like I should do more because teachers are offering extra credit. So it's technically possible to get above a 4.0. I can get everything done on my list, and at the end of the day, there's more to do. So yeah, logically, I know we did the right thing. It was just a bad thought that slipped out, he said as I slid up next to him, holding his rubber glove hand in my own. Hey, Dylan, we did good. And besides, we still have one more place to explore together. It'll be your turn next, and you'll get a chance to lead us all, I said as I snuggled against him in our minor suits, which definitely made it awkward, but I like to think I comforted him in some. We continued in the darkness for a while longer, our lights occasionally glancing over the wall drawings. I saw a story made in paint of a young girl falling down a hole, walking upside down in a new world before going back to her old world and bringing others down to her new world. The final part of the story showed everyone standing upside down with her, and the world above was covered in ash and darkness. A strange story that sounded familiar somewhere, but I will have to ask Autumn when the trial ends. When we left the tunnel, we were in the middle of a moat that surrounded an old two-story house. The far side of the river was surrounded by iron fences. The house itself had no iron fence. It did, however, have a massive yard full of carved pumpkins, each one with a different expression, each one lit inside by candles of many different colors. I saw candles with lights inside that were red, orange, blue, green, and even purple. I forgot how much I missed the color purple. In the Sunset Republic, the color isn't banned, so it's all over the place, usually in places that people don't think about it at all. In the Seven Cities, however, it is banned for anyone who isn't royalty. So the very fact that there were purple candles and pumpkins in the pumpkin house was an impressive show of how powerful this place was if they didn't fear the Vigiles Urbani. When we finally arrived at the shore, the ferryman pointed to crates not far from the shore. Thank you, I said to the ferryman, as the others echoed the sentiment and as we made our way to the crates. They had simple directions on the crate: put our mining equipment into the crates. So we peeled off the suits and put them into the crates as we turned to face the pumpkin house at the center of the pumpkin house grounds. There was a path through the pumpkin lanterns, however, it was clearly not made to be a quick path. Dylan gripped my hand for a moment as we stood there in anticipation. It's your turn to lead us. Now lead us through the pumpkin house. None of us know anything. You're the only one who knows anything, I whispered to him as Dylan took a deep breath before he let go of my hand and he stepped forward, leading us through the pumpkin patch. Funny thing, at least to me, Dylan knew me as Summer, which wasn't my true name, but close enough that I recognized it. And Dylan's name that he gave me wasn't his true name either. It was close, but not his true name, not how he thought of himself. I don't know if he is aware of that or not, but still, it was so sweet of him to give me his false name, even if he wasn't aware of the fact it was his false name.